Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Thanks for being with us here on the fastest show in politics on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite radio, on YouTube. You can watch us right now by searching Bloomberg Business News Live. That's where all the cool kids are, I'm told. That's where the growth and the engagement is. So get on YouTube and find us there as we prepare to welcome our global television audience to the conversation. We have news on the DOGE. This is a pretty big number. I don't know if you heard me mention this a little while ago. Remember, there was a big buyout offer that went to every federal worker across the country, now accepted by more than 20,000 federal workers. They're not all here. They're spread around the country. That's about 1% of the federal workforce, if it sounds like a big number. Now, the last time he was here, we talked about the idea of the DOGE, the concept, with now the former governor of New Hampshire, Republican Chris Sununu. He was with us in the closing days of his administration, having written an important op-ed that we talked about before Elon Musk ever got to Washington. Now we're all here, and he's with us back at the table. Can I still call you governor?
Well, yeah. Well, look, why wouldn't I be here? This is apparently where all the cool kids hang out. As
exactly.
You just said,
you heard that.
This is the place to be.
You couldn't wait to come back. I
love it.
Are you going to be in Washington a lot? I thought your whole point was staying away from Washington.
No, I'm Washington's evil cynic. I come down and remind Washington why they should do more work and get more stuff done. They all go crazy when I show up.
Great role. Well, so it's not just the DOGE; it's the COGE. You call it that in New Hampshire, right?
There is
what,
yes.
The commission
the new governor, Governor Ayotte,
so
has created
a
localized version of it, which is good. Look, efficiency is one of the rarest. Efficiency in government, those are like oil and water, typically. So when you can force them together, what happens? Well, you save money. You create opportunities for better connection with what's happening out there with your departments. It's hard. I mean, the thing that drives me crazy lately, I don't know if you've been seeing it on some of these news reports about DOGE. Well, can you believe they're going to cut money here and cut money there? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're like 30 plus trillion in debt. That's real money. And by the way, the government doesn't owe that money. You do, and I do, and everyone listening here does. So that's real money. It has to be paid. That you got to start somewhere. It's not going to come without a little bit of pain, financial pain. It's not going to be an easy process, but if you plan ahead, you can make that off-ramp as smooth as possible for the citizens of the country.
Well, because, people are upset not about so much the idea of cutting spending, and someone's always going to be upset if you're cutting a program or whatever it is that they're interested in, but they seem to see Elon Musk run wild. They had a couple of security guards fired at USAID. They got into secure areas of the building, shut it down. He's got the keys to the Treasury payment system now, which means he has all of our personal information, and he's like a quasi-government official. Does that make you uncomfortable?
It should, yes. As the guy from the live free or die state, yes, it always makes me a bit uncomfortable. But look, when you have a financial crisis of this level, and believe me, guys, this country does have a real long-term financial crisis. I'd rather have them go a little more aggressive than not do much at all, because we've had 20 years of not doing much at all, right? So if he goes a little more aggressive and then they have to back off a few things, we got rid of this position in that department, we should roll that in, we should find a way to reestablish it, fine. But then the onus is on the government to justify why they need to reestablish it. Okay. And if they can do that, it works. So it's going to be bumpy. They're going very, very fast, which, by the way, is another good thing. Typically, government doesn't move fast in anything. Right. They're acknowledging that this is very serious stuff. They want to move quickly. I think it gives everyone a lot of trepidation that Elon's at the head of this. Yeah. I like it. I like the fact that the guy isn't completely with government. So he's not an insider in the Beltway type guy. Right. He's so wealthy, I just don't believe he has any financial interest in this. People will disagree with me on that all day. Yeah, right. But the guy's worth $400 billion. What's he going to do, make another couple billion? That's not his mission. He's a big picture, big project type guy, and he's willing to take it on. Is he going to do everything perfectly? Heck no. He's going to make a lot of mistakes, but they've probably already had a few bumps already. But a few bumps is okay if at the end of the day we're finding a pathway to saving money, allowing the economy to be fruitful and not just lean on a giant bureaucracy out of Washington that doesn't really know or care about what's happening in the rest of the country.
Well, some would say, okay, great, but we've got to do it right. Bring him up and have him confirmed by the Senate. Let's do a background check.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't mind that.
Official.
I don't know how long. I mean, this is an 18-month gig. If they want to go through a confirmation process, I would have been fine with that. I think he would have gotten through just fine. It seems like even some of the other more controversial confirmation picks, they're actually doing better than I thought, right? Susan Collins is now on board
They're
with
all gonna
with
be
Tulsi.
cleared.
I think they are.
It looks like they will all be cleared. RFK Jr.
Yep.
cleared
Cassidy, I
committee
think, came on
earlier.
board.
Absolutely.
Right?
So it's just a matter of getting this to the floor at this point. I mentioned the DOGE.
Yeah.
What is it? The commission,
Commission, not
on,
the department
okay.
or whatever it is. Yeah.
Don't these, in concept, sort of make the argument that our system of government is broken, that you can't trust lawmakers, that you have to have an outside entity to make it work right?
I don't think it's broken, and I don't think it's a lack of trust in terms of what their motives are. I do think, at least at the state level, why I like this COGE concept at the different state levels, there's much more accountability to what you're doing. In that case of New Hampshire, they're doing a commission, which I like.
Right.
It's short-term, led by business leaders, holding a lot of accountability within the departments at a time when, again, we have very little debt in New Hampshire. We have no taxes in New Hampshire. We're very fiscally sound in New Hampshire. But I think they're planning for what is likely going to be a couple years. It's not going to be a recession, but it's definitely going to be a bit of a flattening of the exponential growth we've seen in 20, 21, 22, or I'm sorry, 21, 22, 23 with inflation. I don't think inflation's really going away. I think a lot of, if you look at what Chairman Powell has indicated on that and what the Fed looks like they're going to do. So they're just saying, let's at least at the local level, we have to be smart, plan ahead, make some tough cuts today to have opportunity tomorrow. Washington doesn't think like that, which is why they have such massive debt and the rest of the states don't.
Interesting. Donald Trump making good on threats of tariffs this week. Interesting. None of them are in effect other than China, because he pulled back on both Mexico and Canada following these 11th hour calls. People talk about border states. You ran one, northern border.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the urgency to shut down our northern border when it comes to things like fentanyl. We understand it was 43 pounds to cross the border as opposed to 21,000 from the Mexican border. Do we need 10,000 troops? Did you have that many illegal immigrants crossing from the north?
New Hampshire is part of what they call the Swanton sector. I don't want to get too wonky for your crowd, but it's
the
basically Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, into eastern New York.
Great.
We were the only state up there that really put our own dollars, because we couldn't get federal help from the National Department of Homeland Security. They refused to give us what they call a delegation agreement, which basically says, hey, we're going to empower your team to do what we can't do. And they had taken our Border Patrol agents from the northern border and sent them to the southern border because the crisis was so big there, which exacerbated the problem. Now, I created a law enforcement initiative, put a couple $1 million up there, which basically coordinated all of our law enforcement on our side with the Canadians on their side. Very successful. The surrounding states didn't do it. So it wasn't, we didn't see, once we did that, we didn't see almost any crossings.
Because they were going to Vermont and Maine.
Quickly, the word got out in Quebec, do not go to New Hampshire. They take this stuff seriously. They would go to Vermont, New York, and especially Buffalo. They come to what they call the Buffalo sector because they're all trying to get to New York. Now, is the issue of fentanyl real? Absolutely it is. I mean, we were at the tip of the spear for the fentanyl crisis. The border crossings are very real. The combined number of border crossings over the last 3 years on the northern border, just in the last year, were 10 times that of all the previous years added up. So it's not the southern border, but it is growing exponentially. There's a few different pieces that probably didn't get covered. Canada has agreements with certain countries that allow them to basically fly in visa-free. And those folks would get off the plane in Montreal and Toronto and walk right over the border. That's what Trump is really trying to seal up, the coordination with law enforcement. And it's having an effect.
See, this is effective.
It's effective. Now, it's going to hurt, right? It's going to hurt certain businesses across the country, especially in New Hampshire. There's no question. But I believe Trump
the tariffs or the security?
The tariffs.
Okay.
The security's great.
Yeah.
The tariffs are going to be, I think they're doing them fast, hard, and early because they know it's going to be a Band-Aid that has to get ripped off to find that resolution. And if they have to take some pain for a couple months to get to where they want to get long-term, obviously it's smarter to do that earlier than later.
Think about lumber, your home builders, your farmers. What are they telling you?
Softwood, maple syrup. We have the best maple syrup in
that
the
might be
world.
good for you,
I just
right?
like to brag about that a little bit. Sorry, Vermont takes second place. But a lot of the equipment to make our maple syrup, which is a huge industry for us, all comes from Canada, right? So there's a lot of things that cross. There are products that will cross the U.S.-Canadian border 6 times before it actually gets complete to
including
manufacturing.
Vehicles,
trucks.
So you're
people.
compounding this tariff into triple digits at that point.
It can be a real problem, but I do believe if it gets us to a better sense of border security, a better partnership with our ally, Canada, and ultimately with Mexico, all the better. You have to do it fast and hard. We've had no management of this for 4 years.
Yeah, right.
So he's going fast and hard to kind of make up a little bit for what just hasn't been done.
You go with grade B. Somebody told me recently grade B tastes better than grade A syrup.
It's a
I
little
grew up
lighter.
in New England, and I never heard that before.
It's a little lighter, a grade A maple syrup.
Yeah.
I didn't think we were going to get into that.
Well,
but
I didn't
grade A
either.
maple syrup is a little darker.
Yeah.
I think it's a little later on in the season, but grade B, I like it
Fascinating.
lighter. Yeah.
Like,
it's
there
a
you
40
go.
to 1. If you tap 40 gallons of sap,
Yep.
you get about 1 gallon of syrup. I'm more of a 20 to 1
fascinating.
guy. I
Yeah,
like it a
okay.
little lighter, but that's a different
Wow.
story.
See, this is the kind of stuff
The things you learn on
when
Bloomberg.
they're out of office. All right, so just one more for you here. You look south of the border to Boston. Michelle Wu, the
I love
darling.
when we say New Hampshire, when we say south of the
Well,
border. It could be a whole variety of
We're
things
talking
that we're
border
talking
states
about.
here.
Yeah.
Michelle Wu, the darling of Massachusetts or Boston liberals. In comes Joshua Kraft, another Democrat, but maybe one Chris Sununu would be more comfortable with running the city of Boston.
So I'm going to be super polite
Yeah.
and political and say when it comes to Michelle Wu, I think the term is lunatic.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we know where we stand on that.
I think she's the most anti-business, pro-government, big spender, big taxer that you've ever seen, to the point where it has driven out so many businesses out of Boston. New Hampshire's flourishing. They're all coming to the tax-free suburb of Boston, which is called New Hampshire, right? and I want Boston to be strong. I want Boston to be. It's an economic driver for all of New England, and what she, along with Maura Healey, have really done is just a travesty. If Joshua Kraft can come in and is willing to put himself on the line. And look, I've been in politics. It stinks. There's a lot of exposure. It's tough on your family. Go through all this scrutiny. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need to do it. But he loves his state. And God bless it, I'd be behind him 110%.
There you
It'd be
go.
a huge
Joshua
win for
Kraft,
Boston.
I hope you're listening.
And New England as a whole.
He made the announcement in Dorchester this morning. I guess we're off to the races here.
I'm behind him
Fascinating.
100%.
All right, grade B.
Exciting.
Don't forget that. I hope you're going to come back often to the extent that you can hold your nose and come to Washington.
I love it.
Chris
If I'm
Sununu.
in this room, we're doing okay.
Very well. The
Smart
former
people.
Republican governor of New Hampshire. A lot to talk about, as always, with Chris Sununu on the fastest show in politics.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We want to go now to Capitol Hill, where a lot of these conversations are ongoing. I'm pleased to say joining us on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee. Senator, welcome back. And there's obviously much we'd like to discuss with you, including your new stablecoin legislation. But if we could first begin with tariffs, as that has dominated the news cycle in the last several days, how are you viewing what President Trump is actually using these levies for? If it was just to extract concessions from Canada and Mexico, or if this is really about raising revenue to pay for tax cuts?
Well, the answer is both. But President Trump was very clear when he imposed the tariffs on Canada and Mexico that they needed to do something dramatic to stop the flow of illegal migrants coming into our country, the flow of fentanyl coming into our country, the human trafficking. That has been the primary and overarching concern. And I've made it clear to the people who reached out to me from both nations that it's clear there's something they can do about it. They need to step up, and frankly, they have. President Trump was clear about what he wanted to see happen, and the Mexican government and the Canadian government are both stepping up to stop the flow of fentanyl, to address issues at their border, to maintain border security on their side, and to be better partners. That's what he's trying to accomplish, and I think that's what he's achieved.
Well, you're, of course, a former diplomat, Senator, as you represented the United States as our ambassador to Canada. So it gives you to Japan.
Joe.
Forgive me. We've been talking about Canada a lot here.
I know.
In that period of time, though, that gave you a unique view on these issues that maybe not all lawmakers have. Are tariffs or threats of tariffs the new form of diplomacy in this administration?
Well, Joe, this is an important piece of context. We've talked about it before, but the United States has basically the lowest trade-weighted tariffs in the world. Access to our markets has been extraordinarily easy. There's an historic reason for this for countries like Japan, countries in Europe whose economies were devastated after World War II. We aggressively made our economy open to them so they wouldn't turn toward communism and socialism. But we should have time limited that. We should have put some sort of GDP per capita limit on it, because what we have now are extremely unfair and non-reciprocal trade terms with many of our trading partners. President Trump has been clear. He's just trying to bring reciprocity to bear, trying to get us to the table with an even deal. A lot of these countries that don't want to address this do so because they have a better deal now than we do. We're going to fix that. President Trump has been clear about it, and I'm very pleased to see him take decisive action in that regard.
Well, Senator, if we could leave the diplomatic hat on for a moment longer, I do wonder
Kailey.
what you make of the efforts, or at least on the part of Elon Musk, and he says he is the president's buy-in, to dismantle USAID. What does that do to U.S. soft power?
Well, you've got a lot of significant problems at USAID. Some of the things that have come to bear, some of the things that have come to light in terms of U.S. taxpayer dollars going to DEI initiatives, transgender surgeries in Guatemala, things of this nature. I think the American public is shocked. And the fact that we're basically taking a pause, taking a very hard look, and looking at agencies like this that have basically gotten out of control. I think the time has come, the American public are ready for it. That doesn't mean that we will not have aid programs going forward, but you've got Secretary of State Marco Rubio taking charge here. He's going to make certain that those aid programs go to advancing U.S. interest and not some of these wild-eyed exploits that the previous administration and administrations prior to that have been on. The USAID, again, basically an out-of-control organization. I'm glad to see it reined in.
Well, we've seen some pretty interesting exploits on behalf of DOGE and by Elon Musk. It's not just USAID, of course, it's accessing the payment system inside the U.S. Treasury Department. Senator, and we understand that Musk is now a special government employee, something that emerged in just the last couple of days, with the Education Department now the next target. As a senator providing advice and consent, would you like Elon Musk to come up to Capitol Hill to endure a confirmation hearing, since this apparently is a government job?
Well, the special government employee classification is about 130 days that allows people to come in from the outside, often people that are very capable, as is Elon Musk, to come in and provide special advice to the president. It's a tool that has been used in administrations, Republican and Democrat. I'm glad to see this sort of expertise deployed. Elon Musk obviously knows how to come in and streamline operations and make things work more efficiently. Look what he did at Twitter. So I'm very pleased to see him step in and do this. This doesn't require confirmation. It's not that type of position. But he is offering his advice, and President Trump has been clear. Where he wants to accept the advice, where he feels Elon Musk efforts are warranted, he's going to deploy him there. I've talked with Elon about what he's doing. I think he's got some very creative ideas about bringing much needed efficiency and actually getting far higher return on investment for the taxpayer dollar.
But is there a role for Congress to play, sir, to ensure that whatever access he's granted at Treasury, whether it's to the payment system specifically or in other cases, that it isn't going to interfere with the Treasury's usual business of paying bondholders and conducting auctions?
Well, we certainly have oversight responsibility, Kailey. We intend to fully exercise that. That's not what I've talked with Elon about doing. He's looking for efficiencies, ways to do things better, to stop doing things that aren't advancing U.S. interest, and to do things that, double down on things that are going to become, more and more productive for U.S. taxpayers and advance the American cause. It's not unusual at all to take a pause, to take a hard look, and survey what's happening inside these agencies. I'm glad that he's doing it. I think there's a lot of pearl clutching going on right now, and a lot of expectation that something terrible is going to happen. No, in fact, what I think is we're going to see is a new wave of efficiency come from all of this, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, just wait for the pearl clutching to start when you start debating taxes and reconciliation, Senator. I have to ask you about where all this stands, because these were supposed to come as a package, right? You'd extend the Trump tax cuts, maybe get some of the other things that Donald Trump had promised on the campaign trail, and offset those with revenue from tariffs that had been promised during the campaign as well. We talked to Scott Besson about that at length before he was tapped to be the Treasury Secretary. With tariffs put aside here, you still have to have a debate over taxes. And as the House drags its feet on this, I wonder if the Senate and your new leader in John Thune might help to lead the way. What's about to happen?
Well, Joe, I met with John Thune last night. A group of us did. We're continuing to advance the ball on this very subject. Again, we know the American public expects us to address the tax package, and we're going to do that. We have a number of other issues that we're trying to address at the same time. How we do it from a process standpoint, I'm much less concerned about. I think the concern is that we get it done quickly, that we get it done efficiently, and I'm optimistic that we will get it done. Despite the procedural back and forth between the House and the Senate, we're going to get it done, and we're very focused on it.
Senator, I'd like to talk about something else you're looking to get done in the Senate, and that's new stablecoin legislation you've introduced alongside Senators Lummis and Gillibrand, calling it the Genius Act. And I do wonder about the timeline here. Is it your intent that this legislation be pushed through before broader market structure legislation, for example, that may work its way through both the banking and ag-oriented committees in both chambers?
Sure, and Kailey, I'll add Senator Tim Scott, the chair of the Banking Committee, is on this legislation with us. We're very excited about it. This is the first step, and we're going to do this first before we get to broader market structure. But it's going to enable us to take a very positive step in the direction of ensuring that the United States is a positive environment for cryptocurrency technology. Stablecoins is one of these issues that I think the United States can be a leader on. It's time for us to do so. Look, there's roughly $28 trillion worth of stablecoin transactions taking place right now across the world. We need to be a leader here in America. This legislation allows us to do that. And I'm extraordinarily optimistic that we're taking that lead. It's going to open the door for many other positive things in the industry. And I'm so excited to have my colleagues on both sides of the aisle join me here. This is going to be an important first step to opening up the market here in America.
Senator, President Trump is hosting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today, the first world leader to visit the new president in this second term. They're going to be holding a news conference a little bit later on that we will carry. If you could put your diplomatic hat back on and explore what these two are going to be talking about when it comes, number one, to a phase two and a ceasefire, but maybe more importantly, this report by the New York Times today that Iran is developing plans for a faster, cruder weapon based on intelligence here in the United States. There are some who suggest this is the time now to preemptively strike Iran while it's on its heels. Are you one of them?
Well, Joe, the last thing I'm going to do is get ahead of the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu on this very important strategic discussion. But I'll say this, these two gentlemen are not afraid to point to the real cause of all this disruption in the Middle East, and that is Iran. Their proxies, the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, they've been behind all of this disruption. But this is Iranian funding, Iranian technology behind all of it. So I think the New York Times is right to look at the cause here finally. You will see, I think, both gentlemen today who are meeting talking about Iran as the proximate cause for this terrorism. And what we've seen is Iran significantly weakened by the actions of the Israeli government. What they've done in southern Lebanon, taking Hezbollah down, what's happened in Syria, I think has significantly exposed and weakened Iran. They are not the strong nation that they'd like us to believe they are, and I think you'll see a strong and united American and Israeli front standing up to Iran, but I won't go beyond the specifics at that point.
It's good to have you back, Senator. We'll, of course, be listening.
Likewise, Joe.
When the bilateral news conference begins after 5 p.m. Bill Hagerty, the Republican senator from Tennessee. Kailey, we covered a lot of ground there. We're going to cover a lot of ground as well coming up with our political panel.
That's right. Lisa Camooso Miller and Jeanne Zaino will be with us as we talk about what's developing in the Senate today. Looks like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard may be getting confirmed to Trump's cabinet after all, though the Gabbard vote hasn't happened yet. We'll look ahead to it here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
How politics and the markets often intersect, as we're seeing take place in vaccine stocks today after the news that RFK Jr. got through the Senate Finance Committee as he heads for confirmation to be Health and Human Services Secretary. The committee voting to advance his nomination to the Senate floor on a party line vote. 14 Republicans said yes, 13 Democrats voted against him. And interestingly, the one Republican we were all watching, a medical doctor, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, ultimately decided to support RFK Jr., and here was his explanation for that on the Senate floor.
It's been a long, intense process, but I've assessed it as I would assess a patient as a physician. Ultimately, restoring trust in our public health institution is too important, and I think Mr. Kennedy can help get that done.
That's where we start our conversation with our political panel today. Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg politics contributor and Democratic analyst, political science professor at Iona University, alongside Lisa Camooso Miller, Republican strategist, former RNC communications director. It's great to have you both here. You consider, Lisa, what was at stake and what Bill Cassidy, a medical doctor, had to say about his concerns surrounding RFK Jr., his stand on any number of issues, beginning with vaccines. You see the tweet from Clay Higgins. Vote your conscience, Senator, or don't. Either way, we're watching. Was this the system working or just a classic case of a pressure campaign in Washington?
Yeah, it feels like a pressure campaign, Joe. I mean, there's no doubt about that this is exactly how this was going to happen. And also, too, there are members who are emboldened, right? They feel as if they can behave this way. They can lodge these kinds of threats to one another. It's what's causing a lot of dissatisfaction inside the Congress. And so my hope is that that's sort of an outlier and that there's a more productive conversation that's happening inside the Senate. It certainly feels that way based on the comments from the senator as it relates to how he made his decision ultimately. And this is a nominee that was the recommendation from the president. I think a lot of the Senate members have decided that it's in their very best interest to allow these nominees play out and to make those decisions now that they have all the information at hand. And we're going to proceed and see how this all goes.
Well, indeed we will. Jeanne, are you surprised at all here that everyone fell in line behind RFK Jr., at least to this point, knowing we still have to do the full vote on the Senate floor and there is still some room for dissent there? But is this how you saw this going?
Yeah, I mean, statistically, they all get through once they go through this, the hearings. But let's just go back to Cassidy for a minute. He said that he was concerned that RFK Jr. in the hearing could not reflect the science that everybody agrees, which says there is absolutely no connection between vaccines and autism. That has been long debunked. Everybody knows it, except RFK Jr. unwilling to say that. Cassidy now says it's okay because he got a confirmation from RFK Jr. He's not going to change the CDC website, not going to change any of the language. Literally 2 hours ago on Truth Social, Donald Trump says this: 20 years ago, autism in children was 1 in 10,000. Now it's 1 in 34. Wow, something's really wrong. We need Bobby. Thank you. How is Cassidy planning to control the president who is going out and saying things that have been absolutely debunked about the science? And that's where Cassidy's claim falls apart. Yeah, he's a victim of a pressure campaign. He looks like he's going to vote for this on the floor. But what he has done as a medical doctor is ensured that a longtime vaccine skeptic who won't go on the floor and say that this is debunked science is now going to be CDC director, Health and Human Services secretary under a president who hours ago said it's questionable if vaccines cause autism.
Yeah, he is. The president has since started truthing about the passing of Tiger Woods' mother, Jeanne. But Lisa, just if you could weigh in on that most recent post. 20 years ago, the president wrote, autism in children was 1 in 10,000. Now it is 1 in 34. Wow! Exclamation point. Something's really wrong. We need Bobby. Thank you. And he did write it. It's signed DJT. What does that tell us about the future of vaccine program, particularly for kids in America?
It would be foolish for any of us to not reflect back on the way that the president addressed vaccines during the COVID pandemic, to believe that he would have any healthy understanding of how important they are in terms of health development in the country. It's just feeding into this overall sense of everything is broken, everything needs to be reconsidered. And it's all part of the brand that we're seeing coming out of the new administration. And so to think we're going back to another way of thinking is wrong-headed. Look, I don't like it either. And I feel Jeanne's unhappiness is palpable, and I'm with her. This is really super uncomfortable and worrisome. But it's foolish for us to sit here and think that this is not the way that things are going to go over the course of the next 4 years. They've showed us their hand. They showed us who they are. And it's time for us to believe them because they're showing us the way.
Well, so let's turn to Tulsi Gabbard then, because we haven't yet seen Republicans show up to vote for her. They'll have the chance to do so within the hour in the Intelligence Committee, where she couldn't afford to lose a single Republican, Lisa. And it kind of seems right now that she won't, after Senators Todd Young, Susan Collins, James Lankford all indicated that they will be supporting her nomination for Director of National Intelligence. Joe and I have been hearing for weeks that Tulsi Gabbard was the most endangered of all of Trump's nominees, that potentially a dozen or more Republicans could ultimately vote against her. Does this one surprise you, Lisa?
No, it doesn't, Kailey. And you know why it doesn't surprise me? Because the Democrats were happy to see her go. And so Republicans are happy to open their arms and bring her into the fold. Yes, she's a risk, absolutely. But I think the fact that the Democratic Party is not standing behind her or saying that she was one of theirs, it's all sort of part of this culture of whatever was wrong is now right. And it's just this sort of fundamental, we'll accept it and we'll take it. It's worrisome, though, to people who know the way that the process has been conducted over the course of time. We've had incredible leaders in these places, especially in the intelligence space, where Tulsi Gabbard is about to go. It's frightening to a lot of people because they know that she's not the right candidate for the job. But the president was just elected with a strong majority from a lot of states that said that they were in favor of change. And that's precisely what he is delivering to us.
Well, I don't know your thoughts on this, Jeanne. Lisa saw them all being confirmed, and we still need to have floor votes in the Senate on these nominees before it's official, but it does appear like the votes are counted. Should we have assumed that was the case because of the pressure campaign that was coming? This, as we keep hearing, is Donald Trump's Congress.
Yeah, we should have assumed it was the case because that's what history tells us. History tells us you get to the floor in terms of getting to committee and you get to your hearing and you will likely be confirmed. I mean, that is what everybody knows. That is what history tells us. There's only a few people in the modern era who have gotten to the stage of the hearings and not gotten confirmed. So that's what we know is the reality. And of course, the pressure campaign, as you mentioned, Joe, that makes it all that much more of a likelihood. But again, this would never surprise anybody who's watched these hearings. I think the surprising thing about watching these hearings is the fact that you're seeing on both sides of the aisle, with some of these people who have been nominated, there is concern about their competence. There is concern about their ability to do the job. And that is what is concerning. So RFK Jr., he was unable to answer basic questions about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, two entitlement programs that are funded out of an agency he will run, which is the largest agency monetarily, even a bigger budget than defense. And yet he couldn't answer basic questions. And again, these were coming from both sides of the aisle. So I don't think it's, a big stretch to say they're going to get confirmed. It is a big shock to listen to people who don't seem to have the knowledge and the competence to do these positions. That is concerning to many of us. And again, on both sides of the aisle, but it's not going to move people like Cassidy or Collins because they are up in 26 and they know the score, which is a primary challenge awaits. And they are responding to that.
Well, so Jeanne, to your point, it's one thing to get the job. It's another to keep it. We obviously saw a great deal of turnover, including at the cabinet level, in the first Trump administration. How hard is it going to be for RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, or frankly, anyone who gets confirmed to stay in line with the president? To what extent do they actually have freedom to pursue their own agendas?
Yeah, I don't think they have much freedom. I think we're already seeing that. I mean, we saw when the president came out and talked about the horrific crash in the Potomac, about the nominees who came forward, who had to talk about DEI first and praise him before they talked about the bodies still being pulled out of the river. I think that continues. And even more so than that, would anybody with sense want to serve in this administration knowing that Mark Milley, Bolton, and others who went against the president then had their security pulled, even though they are facing death threats at the moment from Iran? So this is very, very tricky business for these nominees. And I think we will see turnover. That's not unusual. But these people face turnover and little protection from the president or the federal government once that happens. That's a scary proposition.
All right, Jeanne Zaino and Lisa Camooso Miller, our political panel on this Tuesday. Thank you both so much for joining us here on Balance of Power. And we still have more ahead as we shift our focus from domestic politics to geopolitics, with the expected visit just hours from now of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. He's scheduled to get there around 4 p.m. Eastern time, with a lot on the agenda. Of course, the first foreign leader to visit Trump at the White House so far this term.
That's right. It's considered a pretty major honor, and Benjamin Netanyahu has reminded us of that. We'll be seeing the two of them a few hours from now, just after 5 p.m. A bilateral news conference from the White House has been scheduled. We'll bring it to you live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. One of many things happening inside the Beltway today. You mentioned as well the looming vote for Tulsi Gabbard in committee. That will also happen before we get back together on the late edition of Balance of Power. Hagar Chemali is coming in next as we try to figure the progress that could be made at the White House today.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We are live from Washington, where we're standing by for an important news conference. It's scheduled to start a few hours from now. Whether it's on time, we'll find out together as President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu prepare to hold a bilateral news conference on what is the first visit of a foreign leader to this new administration. Netanyahu, with much on the line here, of course, in phase one of a ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza, spoke to reporters on his way to the U.S. Let's listen.
I'm leaving for a very important meeting with President Trump in Washington. The fact that this would be President Trump's first meeting with a foreign leader since his inauguration is telling. I think it's a testimony to the strength of the Israeli-American alliance. It's also a testimony to the strength of our personal friendship. That friendship and that cooperation has already yielded important results for Israel in the Middle East.
But can this meeting this afternoon yield even further results as we look toward the potential of a phase two of this ceasefire agreement? Joining us now to get into this here in our Washington, D.C. studio, I'm pleased to say, is Hagar Chemali. She was former director for Syria and Lebanon at the National Security Council, now founder and CEO of Greenwich Media Strategies. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Lovely to see you here in D.C. When we consider that phase one does still seem to be intact as we speak, as Netanyahu visits Washington, knowing that the clock is ticking for this to expire, do you see us getting into phase two at the end of this 42-day period?
Well, I'm not so sure about phase two because there are a few reasons why it's going to be difficult. And part of it is that the requirements of phase two are that Hamas must release all remaining hostages in exchange for the IDF completely withdrawing from Gaza and a declaration of a permanent end to the war. And that is a major step to make, especially when you've got Netanyahu and his cabinet who very clearly said that they want to resume war after phase one. But the timing here is interesting because this week is when the negotiations for phase two are supposed to begin. And those negotiations are still valid and still important, even if phase two is unlikely, because if it doesn't go into phase two, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't potential other deals that could happen. The Trump administration has made it very clear that they want to reach an end to the war, and they want to achieve it in this broader deal that includes Saudi Arabia, the UAE. I've been in Washington, D.C. now for a few days, and all I hear about from the administration is a prioritization of the Abraham Accords and how this could feature into it. So there is still something there to discuss, even if phase two of the original ceasefire deal might not be reached.
King of Jordan set to visit the White House next week. Does that help to connect the dots?
Absolutely.
What you're talking about?
There's it's not a coincidence that Trump's very first phone call was to MBS. His very first official visit is with Netanyahu. He is, and now you've got Jordan being followed by this. You've got an effort to reset these relationships, all of these relationships, to prioritize the Abraham Accords, in which they want to include as many countries as possible. And also, by the way, to remind all of those leaders in the Middle East in particular, and probably around the world, to rely on the United States as an ally and partner, and not to hedge with China, most importantly.
Well, so when we consider other Arab countries here, it does seem the administration also has asks potentially of these countries. We just heard from Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy to the Middle East, who was speaking to reporters at the White House, saying that the U.S. wants Arab nations to take in Palestinians from Gaza. The president himself has floated this as well. Are any Arab nations going to agree to that? Jordan included, Egypt, another example?
Okay, so this one is a very fascinating one to me because I will tell you, throughout the war since October 7, I have always been a proponent of Egypt and Jordan taking Gazan refugees as refugees, by the way. And I find it, to quote Queen Rania, but to turn it back on them, morally reprehensible that they didn't. Because what they ended up doing was trapping them in a situation where they knew Israel's response, a response to the Hamas terrorist attack. They knew how it would go, and they deliberately kept them in there. And there are many reasons that we could go into separately. They're concerned about whether those refugees will remain permanent. You've had many problems in history with Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Kuwait, and Lebanon creating violence, pursuing civil war. So I understand that goal, but these are two countries that take U.S. aid and a lot of U.S. aid. And that's not a point of leverage that the Biden administration was comfortable pulling over their heads and twisting their arms and saying, you take all this aid, you need to take these refugees, not permanently, but you need to house them as this situation happens and unfolds. And that's, from what I understand over and over again from the administration, while I understand the language could come off concerning, their goal is to have that be not permanent, to have them move because Gaza's uninhabitable.
I want to hear about the relationship between these two. A lot has been written between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, knowing they didn't talk for about 4 years. There was incredible bad blood between the two of them for the bulk of the Biden administration. You remember how bitter Donald Trump was about the fact that Netanyahu called Joe Biden to congratulate him for winning before the whole Stop the Steal movement had come to an end. He actually criticized Netanyahu after October 7th. They need each other now. What is their relationship like?
That's right. It's a very interesting relationship because it's not necessarily that they're best buds. Yeah. But during the first Trump administration, we know the extent to which Trump prioritizes the alliance with Israel and is very pro-Israel. And we've seen that play out in many ways, recognizing the annexation of the Golan Heights, moving the embassy to Jerusalem very quickly now since he's come to office. He talked about it during the campaign anyway, but one of the first steps he took was to halt this, or unhalt, I guess, the halt in 2,000-pound bombs to Israel that Biden had halted. So we can see where his goals are and his priorities are, but that said, their relationship is a little tenuous. But at the same time, Netanyahu doesn't want to say no to Trump, and I don't expect him to. And this is why this trip is going to be so fascinating, because you're coming at a point right now where they're going to be talking about the phase 2, or what comes after the first of phase 1 at least, and Trump has this goal, Netanyahu has a different goal, and Trump is a deal maker, and he's going to try and find a way to say, I want an end to this war, and I want to achieve U.S. national security objectives in this region, and you're going to have to work with me on it. Whether that might result in a new election in Israel because of these moves is Netanyahu's problem.
Well, so you're saying Trump with the leverage here, not Netanyahu.
Trump is the one who has the leverage. And I would expect to see this not just with Israel, but with pursuing peace with a number of countries, particularly one of the ones I'm very hopeful for, and I hope they prioritize, is peace with Lebanon. Now is the only time to pursue that kind of deal, given the situation there domestically, and would really serve U.S. national security interests because that's Israel's neighbor. So they're going to be looking at this from a real holistic approach.
All this against the backdrop of this report today in the New York Times that a secret team of scientists in Iran is exploring a faster, if cruder, approach to developing an atomic weapon. What sense of urgency does this put underneath these talks? And are we going to start hearing more about, and we've already heard it on this program, a potential preemptive strike against Iran?
Well, so this issue, Iran will definitely feature prominently in these talks. The administration they've not come out completely yet because they're still figuring it out on exactly the policy they would pursue regarding military engagement or bombing Iran's nuclear program. And so they haven't come out yet with where they stand on that. I wouldn't believe that the administration would hold back if they thought that was the right move. But also, by the way, that unpredictability, those not being black and white about it serves the interests of the Trump administration, because they want Iran to feel afraid of how the administration might react, might advise Israel. And so they play that to their favor as well. But I absolutely believe that this is going to be featured prominently. They are already prioritizing it, but they haven't come out very clearly yet with the exact policy toward Iran, other than that they intend to renew the maximum pressure campaign.
This will be another warning from Trump in this newser today when all hell will break. Like he said about the ceasefire and the hostages. This is the next warning that's coming,
yes,
right?
And we have to remember, right now is Trump walked into a very unique time with geopolitical dynamics in the region, with this axis of resistance on its heels. Iran on the defense, Hezbollah decapitated, Hamas decimated, and Assad has fallen. And that's something that the Trump administration is going to take to its advantage. And I don't expect Iran to be able to go very far with that.
Because you allude to Bashar al-Assad, I do want to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard, who, of course, faced a lot of questions in her confirmation hearing last week about her visit to see him in 2017, in addition to a number of other difficult questions she was asked. And for all of that, it does seem that just moments from now, really in the 2 p.m. hour, she will be passed through the Intel Committee, heading to a full confirmation vote on the Senate floor. What is your thought on that?
It looks like that, and I want to be clear. Because I'm very concerned about her in this position. I don't feel like that about every cabinet minister at all. Cabinet ministers, excuse me. Every cabinet secretary or principal in Trump's cabinet at all. I am particularly concerned about her because I believe that over the years she has reflected very poor judgment and instinct, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to believing the analyses and assessments of our intelligence community. So I'm concerned about it, but I also don't feel as though I feel as though that train is moving and it doesn't seem as though anybody. It seems that though there are concerns, but yet she's still going to be confirmed in this position. And the concern with that is that this is the person who briefs the president daily at the presidential daily briefing. And if she's receiving an assessment from the intelligence community on anything, it could be Iran or Russia or China or anything, and she reads it a different way, and she tells President Trump, well, I don't think that this is a threat, or I think that Putin's actually not so bad, or Assad is actually is it? Well, Assad's gone now, but whomever it could be, it could be anybody. Given that judgment she has reflected in the past, she just, to me, hasn't proven herself for this kind of role.
Well, we should remind our listeners and viewers that Syria was a prominent part of your portfolio when you were working in the White House. That must inform your opinion on her in a singular fashion, no? Her dalliances with Bashar al-Assad mean what?
Yes, it's that, and that is absolutely entirely what I meant. I talked about. I handled Syria for 2 years during the Syria crisis, and it was not hard for someone, even just on the outside, to know what was happening and to know what Assad was doing. But she went after the assessment of his use of chemical weapons. She had access to that information, being in Congress. She was briefed on it, and still chose to go, and still chose to say that he wasn't an enemy of the United States. She questioned whether he used chemical weapons against his people. And I will tell you, by the way, the bar for the U.S. government to make that assessment was very high. And it was not something they did lightly. It took a long time. And she still questioned it. And that, again, I just don't see why she will. I believe that lack of judgment and instinct will apply to anything she works on, any portfolio all over the world.
Well, I guess we'll see how this goes in the Intelligence Committee later on today, and ultimately the full Senate floor. Before we let you go, Hagar, we just have a few minutes left here, but I also do wonder what your reflection is on what's happening with USAID, the push by Elon Musk, and he says he has Donald Trump's buy-in to dismantle this entirely, the State Department getting control. How much foreign aid is realistically going to be left after this review, do you anticipate?
Well, so from what I understand, emergency aid, so meaning food, medicine, medical equipment, that is going through, and that's going to continue, and that's pretty standard for the U.S. government anyway. It's the same with sanctions. Sanctions don't impact humanitarian aid for food and medicine and medical equipment. It's the aid that they're looking at for civil society, for democracy, and they're reviewing all of it. So some of it will come back. But I don't want to sound naive in saying that all of it is going to come back. Of course, there's always fat to trim when it comes to U.S. foreign aid. Reviews are a good thing, but it's been chaotic for sure. And I've spoken to many friends in the government who are obviously, they're concerned, and a lot of it has to do with the unknown, and that is going to have a direct impact for sure. You're going to see NGOs and nonprofits all over the world lose funding that they had come to rely on, funding that does feed into U.S. national security interests. But that doesn't mean that Trump administration doesn't want the same interests. It's that many of them are going about it through a different approach, with a tougher approach, often using sticks and commercial and financial tools as leverage.
Elon Musk calls USAID a criminal organization. We'll be following this story very closely. What a pleasure, as always, to have Hagar Chemali with us in studio. Hagar, thank you so much. Enjoy your time back in Washington for a moment. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.